For more than 2 decades, Princess Anne carried a secret so explosive that revealing it could fracture the royal family forever. A promise made beside a deathbed. A whisper no one else was meant to hear. But now, in a moment no one expected, Anne has broken her silence, and what she revealed about the Queen Mother's final instructions has sent shockwaves through the monarchy, threatening everything the crown thought it had protected. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Princess Anne was never the loudest voice in the royal family. She never chased attention. She never fought for public sympathy. Instead, she became something far more powerful, something far more dangerous to those who underestimated her. She became the crown's most reliable guardian of secrets. From childhood, Anne understood something others struggled to accept. The monarchy did not survive on ceremony alone. It survived on discipline, on silence, on knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when never to speak at all. And for decades, she honored that code without hesitation. She watched, she listened, she absorbed truths that others were never permitted to hear. But there was one truth above all others that weighed on her with a gravity she could never escape. The Queen Mother was not simply a figure of tradition. She was the emotional fortress of the monarchy. She had lived through abdication, war, scandal, and uncertainty, and she had outlasted them all with an unshakable calm that made others believe the crown itself was indestructible. But beneath that calm was a mind constantly calculating the monarchy's survival. She understood human weakness better than anyone. She knew loyalty could fade. She knew devotion could fracture. And in her final years, those instincts sharpened, not softened. She began to look beyond the present, beyond the roles and titles everyone saw, searching instead for something far more permanent. She was searching for continuity, for protection, for someone who could carry forward not just the crown, but its soul. It was during those final hours, as the world outside remained unaware that history was quietly reaching its most intimate turning point, that Princess Anne found herself summoned into a moment that would define the rest of her life. The air was heavy with finality, but the Queen Mother's mind remained clear, focused, intentional. This was not a farewell clouded by weakness. This was a final act of authority. Anne stood there not simply as a granddaughter, but as a witness, a custodian, someone chosen not because of her position, but because of her strength. Because the Queen Mother knew Anne would not break. She would not panic. She would not betray the responsibility she was about to inherit. And then came the instructions. They were not vague. They were not symbolic. They were precise, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. The Queen Mother was not merely passing on memories or personal reflections. She was issuing a directive, one that carried implications far beyond her own lifetime. Anne felt the weight of those words immediately. She understood, even in that moment, that what she was being entrusted with was not meant to be shared freely. It was meant to be protected, guarded, preserved until the exact moment when revealing it would no longer weaken the monarchy but save it. And so Anne did what she had always done. She remained silent, but silence, no matter how disciplined, has a cost. Over the years, Anne watched as relationships shifted, as alliances strengthened and fractured in ways the Queen Mother had quietly anticipated. She began to see the future unfolding exactly as it had been feared. She began to understand why those final instructions had been given, why they had been given to her, and why they had been meant for a specific moment in time, a moment when the truth would no longer be a risk, but a necessity. That moment, it seems, has finally arrived, and now, the truth she carried for more than 20 years has begun to surface, forcing the monarchy to confront a reality it can no longer outrun. But to understand why Anne's revelation matters so deeply, we must first uncover the extraordinary relationship between the Queen Mother and the one person she secretly chose to protect above all others. In her final years, those closest to the Queen Mother noticed something unsettling. Her confidence never faded, but her trust did. She watched quietly as loyalties shifted and ambitions surfaced behind palace doors, and according to Princess Anne, the Queen Mother became increasingly concerned that the crown's future was in danger, not from outsiders, but from forces within her own family. That fear would ultimately shape one final, irreversible decision. The Queen Mother had always possessed an instinct that bordered on prophetic. She did not need declarations or confessions to understand people. She read hesitation, she read tone, she read silence. Decades of surviving the monarchy's most fragile moments had trained her to detect danger long before it revealed itself openly. She had witnessed betrayal disguised as loyalty. She had seen devotion collapse under the weight of personal ambition. And as the years passed and her physical strength slowly diminished, her awareness of these shifting loyalties only sharpened. Age did not weaken her perception. It refined it. It gave her clarity others lacked. And with that clarity came a quiet but growing concern she rarely voiced aloud. She began to observe more carefully, measuring not words but consistency. She noticed who owed up when duty called, and who showed up only when attention followed. She noticed who protected the institution and who protected themselves. These were not small observations. To her, they were warning signs, because the monarchy was not sustained by ceremony or wealth. It was sustained by sacrifice, and she had spent her entire life sacrificing personal comfort to protect something far greater than herself. The thought that future guardians of the crown might lack that same devotion filled her with a private, unshakable unease. Princess Anne would later reveal that the Queen Mother never expressed this fear dramatically. She never accused, she never confronted. Instead, she watched in silence, absorbing everything. But behind that silence was calculation. She understood that time was no longer on her side. She knew that whatever protections she intended to put in place would need to happen quietly, deliberately, and without interference. Because once she was gone, her voice would be gone with her, and she refused to leave the crown vulnerable to uncertainty. What troubled her most was not weakness, it was misplaced loyalty. She feared that some within the family valued the privileges of royalty more than its burden, that they understood the visibility of the crown, but not its responsibility. This distinction haunted her, because she had seen what happened when personal desire overtook institutional duty. She had lived through the consequences, and she was determined that the monarchy would never again face such instability without preparation. So she began to evaluate, not publicly, but internally. She reflected on character, on resilience, on quiet strength. She asked herself a single question over and over again. Who could be trusted to endure the pressure without breaking? Who could carry the crown's emotional weight when the world inevitably turned against it? This was not about popularity. It was about endurance. It was about loyalty, when loyalty was no longer convenient. And somewhere within those reflections, she reached a conclusion that surprised even her most trusted confidant. Because she had seen something rare, something unmistakable, a presence that did not demand authority, but commanded respect through consistency alone. Someone who understood suffering without surrendering to it. Someone who did not seek power, but could be trusted with it. And once she recognized that truth, the Queen Mother knew her final act could not simply follow tradition. It had to secure the future she believed in, regardless of expectation or assumption. And when her final hours arrived, she made sure only one person she trusted completely would hear the truth directly from her lips. As the Queen Mother's strength faded, the palace grew quieter. But inside that private room, something extraordinary happened. Princess Anne stepped forward not as a royal figure, but as a granddaughter entrusted with a final burden. What Anne heard in those final moments was not just a farewell, it was a directive, a command that would bind her in silence for decades and place the future of the Queen Mother's fortune into entirely unexpected hands. Princess Anne would later describe that moment not as a scene of weakness, but of unmistakable authority. The Queen Mother was physically fragile, yet mentally unshaken. Her voice, though softer than before, carried the same precision that had guided the monarchy through its most uncertain eras. She did not speak in fragments. She spoke in intention. There was no confusion, no hesitation. This was not a woman surrendering to the end. This was a woman finishing what she had started long ago. Anne sensed it immediately. The gravity of what was about to be entrusted to her was not ceremonial. It was permanent, there, Had been others nearby earlier, fulfilling their roles, offering comfort, observing respectfully. But then came the moment when the Queen Mother made a quiet request that changed everything. She asked for Anne specifically, not as protocol, not as routine, as necessity. It was a request that could not be misinterpreted. Anne stepped forward, aware that something deeply personal was unfolding. The room, heavy with unspoken emotion, seemed to isolate the two of them in a way that separated duty from intimacy. In that moment, Anne was no longer simply a senior royal, she was the chosen witness. The Queen Mother's eyes remained steady, focused entirely on Anne. And when she spoke, it was not to reminisce. It was to instruct. She spoke of legacy not as a concept, but as a responsibility that must be guarded with ruthless care. She spoke of trust, not as something freely given, but as something earned through endurance. And then, with unmistakable clarity, she revealed what Anne would later struggle to fully comprehend. Her private fortune, carefully protected and deliberately preserved, was not meant to follow expectation. It was not meant to obey tradition. It was meant to follow judgment. Anne felt the words before she fully processed them. The Queen Mother was not asking for permission, she was declaring her will. She explained that the fortune she had built over a lifetime was never simply wealth, it was leverage, protection, a safeguard against a future she feared could become unstable. And she had chosen, with absolute certainty, the one person she believed deserved both the protection and the responsibility that came with it. Anne listened, her composure intact, but inside, something shifted. Because the name that followed was not one she had prepared herself to hear. For a fleeting moment, Anne experienced something she rarely allowed herself to feel: shock. Not Becca, she doubted the Queen Mother's judgment, but because she understood the consequences of it. She understood what this decision would mean, how it would ripple through relationships, how it would alter perceptions, how it would quietly reshape the balance of trust within the monarchy itself. She realized instantly why this moment had been reserved for her alone, because only someone like Anne, someone conditioned by loyalty above emotion, could carry such a truth without letting it fracture her. The Queen Mother did not ask Anne to explain it. She did not ask her to defend it. She asked only one thing: that her instructions be honored, completely, without interference, without compromise. It was not framed as a request. It was framed as a continuation of duty. Anne, standing there under the weight of history itself, understood that refusal was never an option. This was her grandmother's final act of leadership, her final act of protection. And Anne accepted it not with words, but with resolve. In that moment, Anne made a promise that would define her silence for the next 20 years. She would protect the Queen Mother's final decision, even if it meant carrying the burden alone, even if it meant watching events unfold without explanation, even if it meant enduring the quiet isolation that came with knowing a truth no one else was permitted to hear, because loyalty, as she had learned from the Queen Mother herself, was not proven in moments of comfort. It was proven in moments of unbearable responsibility. But the name the Queen Mother whispered was not one the palace or the world would have ever expected. When Princess Anne revealed the name, it stunned even those closest to the crown. Catherine, not the expected heirs, not the traditional successors. Catherine. According to Anne, the Queen Mother saw something in her that others had overlooked: a strength, a quiet resilience, and a devotion that reminded her of herself. But this choice wasn't just symbolic. It was financial, strategic, and it had the power to permanently alter the monarchy's internal balance. For Anne, hearing that name in that moment created a fracture between expectation and reality. Catherine had not yet become the global figure the world would later recognize. She was still navigating the relentless scrutiny that came with stepping into a family defined by history, judgment, and impossible standards. And yet, the Queen Mother had spoken her name with certainty, not hesitation, not doubt. Certainty. It was as if she was not describing Catherine as she was in that moment, but as she would become. That realization unsettled Anne more than she ever admitted, because it meant the Queen Mother had seen a future others were blind to. The Queen Mother had always valued endurance above popularity. She knew that public affection could rise and fall like tides, but endurance was something far rarer. It could not be taught. It could not be manufactured. It revealed itself only under pressure, and she had been watching Catherine carefully. She had seen how Catherine absorbed criticism without retaliation, how she remained steady when others might have collapsed under the weight of constant evaluation, how she placed duty before personal comfort. These were not traits easily recognized by those focused on appearances, but to the Queen Mother, they were unmistakable signs of strength. Anne would later confess that she did not fully understand it at first. She had grown up inside the monarchy. She understood its rules, its traditions, its unspoken hierarchies. And Catherine, at that time, existed outside those established expectations. She had not yet proven herself through decades of service. She had not yet endured the tests that defined royal legacy. But the Queen Mother would dudded the pest that defined royal legacy as not making a decision based on time served. She was making a decision based on something far more instinctive. She was choosing based on character. What made this decision even more profound was the nature of the fortune itself. It was not simply money. It was independence. It was protection. It was the ability to act without dependence on shifting alliances or institutional approval. The Queen Mother understood that financial autonomy created a shield, a safeguard against vulnerability. By leaving that fortune to Catherine, she was not merely rewarding her, she was empowering her, ensuring that Catherine would never be placed in a position where her loyalty could be compromised by circumstance. It was, in every sense, a strategic transfer of strength. Anne began to realize that this was never about favoritism, it was about survival. The Queen Mother had witnessed enough history to know that the Crown's greatest threats rarely came from outside forces. They came from instability within, from uncertainty, from moments when leadership faltered under emotional pressure. And she believed Catherine possessed something that could prevent that future from unfolding. She believed Catherine's loyalty was not performative but permanent. That belief became the foundation of her final decision. What disturbed Anne most was how far in advance the Queen Mother had reached this conclusion. This was not a last-minute impulse shaped by sentiment. It was something she had contemplated carefully, quietly, over years of observation. She had watched Catherine grow into her role, long before the world recognized her importance. She had seen the emotional discipline that others overlooked, and she had acted accordingly, ensuring that when the time came, Catherine would possess not only symbolic importance, but real, tangible protection. In the years that followed, Anne carried that knowledge, alone, watching as Catherine stepped deeper into the monarchy's unforgiving structure. She saw Catherine endure pressures that confirmed the Queen Mother's judgment. She saw her remain composed when others might have broken. And slowly, Anne began to understand. The Queen Mother had not chosen Catherine for who she was. She had chosen her for who she knew she would become. But what made this revelation even more explosive was the existence of something Anne had kept hidden all along. For years, there were whispers of a sealed document connected to the Queen Mother's estate, but no one could prove it existed, until now. According to Princess Anne, the Queen Mother didn't rely on words alone. She left behind written confirmation, protected, hidden, and deliberately delayed. And when its existence was finally acknowledged, it confirmed what many had refused to believe. Catherine had been personally chosen. Princess Anne understood immediately why the Queen Mother had taken that extra step. Spoken words, no matter how powerful, could be denied. They could be questioned. They could be buried beneath doubt and rewritten by those who benefited from silence. But written instructions carefully prepared and deliberately concealed could not be erased so easily. They carried permanence. They carried authority, and most importantly, they carried intention that could survive long after the voice that created them had gone silent. The Queen Mother had anticipated resistance. She had anticipated disbelief, and she had prepared for it with precision. Anne was entrusted not with possession of the document itself, but with knowledge of its existence and the responsibility of its protection. That distinction mattered, because the document was never meant to surface immediately. It was never meant to ignite conflict while emotions were still raw and loyalties still uncertain. Its timing, hatch, had been calculated with chilling foresight. The Queen Mother understood that revealing such a decision too early could fracture relationships before the monarchy was emotionally prepared to absorb its consequences. So she ensured the directive would remain dormant, shielded by time and secrecy, until the exact moment when its revelation would stabilize the future rather than destabilize the present. Only a handful of individuals knew the truth, not because they were chosen arbitrarily, but because they were deemed capable of carrying it without distortion. Anne was among the very few trusted with that burden, and she carried it with the quiet endurance that defined her entire life. But the weight of that knowledge was not without cost. There were moments when she watched confusion unfold around her, moments when decisions were questioned, when tensions surfaced, when suspicions quietly formed without explanation. Anne said nothing. She could say nothing, because revealing the truth prematurely would not honor the Queen Mother's wishes. It would endanger them. There were nights when Anne questioned the silence, not the Queen Mother's decision, but her own role in protecting it. She understood the loneliness of knowing something that could alter perceptions overnight. She understood the emotional isolation that came with loyalty so absolute it demanded personal sacrifice. But every time doubt surfaced, she returned to the promise she had made, a promise not born from obligation, but from trust. The Queen Mother had chosen Anne because she knew Anne would never break under pressure. She would never betray the timing of something so carefully orchestrated. When the existence of the document was finally acknowledged, it did more than confirm Catherine's inheritance. It validated the Queen Mother's foresight. It proved that this had never been speculation, never rumor, never assumption. It had been a deliberate, documented act of protection, and suddenly, events that once seemed confusing began to make sense. Subtle shifts in behavior, quiet tensions that had no visible cause, moments when certain individuals seemed aware of something they could not openly discuss. The document had existed all along, waiting patiently for its moment to emerge. Its revelation did not create the truth. It exposed it. It forced those within the monarchy to confront a reality that had been carefully shielded from view. Anne had fulfilled her role exactly as intended. She had protected the Queen Mother's final instruction until the moment it could no longer be ignored. And once that moment arrived, the monarchy was forced to face not only the decision itself, but the implications of what it meant for the future balance of trust, loyalty, and power. That the greatest shock wasn't the fortune itself. It was how others reacted when the truth began to emerge. When whispers of the Queen Mother's final instructions began to circulate, the reaction inside palace walls was immediate and deeply divided. Some saw it as a rightful act of foresight, others saw it as a betrayal. Princess Anne found herself caught between loyalty to her grandmother and the emotional consequences of revealing a truth that could permanently alter relationships within the royal family. The monarchy had always functioned on a delicate balance, an unspoken understanding that tradition would guide succession, influence, and legacy. But this revelation disrupted that balance in ways no one had anticipated. Questions began to surface quietly at first, carried in careful conversations and guarded tones. Why Catherine? Why her, above all others? For some, the answer was obvious, a recognition of strength that had been quietly earned over time. But for others, the decision felt like an unexpected deviation from the structure they had always relied on. It was not simply the fortune that unsettled them. It was what the fortune represented. It was trust, expressed in its most permanent form. Princess Anne felt the shift immediately. She had anticipated resistance, but knowing it would come did not make enduring it easier. She had spent her entire life protecting the monarchy, absorbing its pressures without complaint. But this was different. This was personal. She was no longer just protecting the crown, she was protecting the final will of someone she loved deeply. And that responsibility placed her in an impossible position, because honoring the Queen Mother's wishes meant accepting that others might misunderstand her silence, her loyalty, and her motives. Yet she did not waver. She never had. What made the situation even more emotionally complex was the fact that Catherine herself had never sought this inheritance. For years, she remained unaware of the role she had been chosen to fulfill. She continued carrying out her duties without the knowledge that the Queen Mother had quietly placed her at the centre of a long-term plan. Anne had watched Catherine closely during those years, studying her reactions to pressure, observing her composure during moments of public scrutiny. And with every test Catherine endured, Anne felt a growing certainty that the Queen Mother's instincts had been correct. Catherine was not shaped by privilege, she was shaped by endurance. Still, the revelation introduced an undeniable tension that could not be ignored. Some individuals began to question what Catherine's rise truly meant. Not just financially, but symbolically, because wealth within the monarchy was never just wealth. It was autonomy, it was influence, it was protection from vulnerability, and by granting Catherine that protection, the Queen Mother had altered the monarchy's internal structure in ways that extended far beyond inheritance. She had given Catherine something far more powerful than recognition. She had given her independence. Anne understood the implications better than anyone. She knew this decision had never been about elevating one person above others. It had been about ensuring stability. It had been about protecting the monarchy's future from uncertainty. But that did not prevent discomfort from spreading quietly through the institution. Change, even when necessary, was rarely welcomed easily. And Anne, standing at the center of that change, carried its emotional consequences without defense. Despite the tension, Anne never allowed doubt to weaken her resolve. Her loyalty to the Queen Mother was absolute. She had made a promise, and promises in her world were unbreakable. She did not reveal the truth to create division. She revealed it because the moment had arrived when silence would cause more harm than revelation. Because the monarchy could not move forward while its most carefully protected truth remained buried beneath fear and assumption. As the reality of the Queen Mother's decision settled into the consciousness of the royal family, something fundamental shifted. Power, once assumed to be predictable, now carried a new dimension. Catherine's position was no longer defined solely by marriage or duty. It was reinforced by the deliberate trust of one of the monarchy's most formidable figures, and Anne, having fulfilled her role as protector of that truth, knew there was only one question left that demanded an answer. But perhaps the most emotional moment came when Anne finally explained why she chose to speak now. For decades, Princess Anne remained silent, not out of fear, but out of timing. She understood the weight of what she carried, but something changed. According to those closest to her, Anne realized the moment had come when silence would no longer protect the crown, it would endanger it. Breaking her silence was not an act of betrayal, it was an act of protection. Anne had lived her entire life by a principle few truly understood. Loyalty was not about comfort. It was about endurance. It was about carrying burdens that no one else could see and never allowing their weight to break your resolve. For years, she honored the Queen Mother's final instruction without question. She never hinted, never explained, never defended herself when quiet assumptions formed around her. Because she knew the truth was not hers to release freely. It belonged to time, and time, she believed, would reveal when the monarchy was strong enough to absorb it. But over the years, Anne began to sense something unsettling. The stability the Queen Mother had fought so fiercely to protect was beginning to show subtle fractures. Not openly, not dramatically, but enough for Anne to recognize the early signs. She saw uncertainty in places that had once been unshakable. She saw hesitation where there had once been confidence. And she understood something that others did not yet fully realize, that the longer the truth remained buried, the greater the risk that its eventual revelation would arrive too late to serve its purpose. Silence, once a shield, was slowly becoming a threat. What guided Anne most was not pressure, but observation. She had watched Catherine closely, not as a symbol, but as a person. She had seen her endure relentless scrutiny without surrendering her composure. She had seen her absorb criticism without allowing it to reshape her identity. She had seen her choose restraint when reaction would have been easier. These were not small qualities. They were proof that Catherine possessed the emotional discipline the Queen Mother had recognized long before anyone else. And Anne realized something. Profound Catherine was no longer the future the Queen Mother had anticipated. She had become the present the monarchy needed. Still, the decision to speak was not easy. Anne understood the consequences better than anyone. She knew revealing the truth would invite questions, doubt, even resentment. She knew it could alter relationships permanently, but she also knew that loyalty to the Queen Mother meant honoring not just her words, but her intent. And her intent had never been secrecy for its own sake. It had been protection, protection of the crown, protection of its future. Protection of the one person she believed could carry its emotional weight forward without compromise. Anne's silence had never been weakness. It had been strategy. She had waited not because she was afraid, but because she understood timing was everything. The Queen Mother had trusted her not just to protect the truth, but to recognize the exact moment when revealing it would strengthen the monarchy rather than divide it. And now, Anne believed that moment had arrived. Catherine had proven herself not through inheritance, but through endurance, through consistency, through unwavering devotion to duty, even when duty demanded personal sacrifice. When Anne finally allowed the truth to emerge, it was not with triumph, it was with acceptance. She understood that revealing it would not erase tension overnight. It would not answer every question, but it would restore clarity. It would fulfill the promise she had carried for decades. And most importantly, it would ensure that the Queen Mother's final act of protection was completed exactly as intended. Anne did not seek validation. She did not seek approval. She had never needed either. Her role had never been to control how others responded. Her role had been to protect the truth until the moment it could no longer remain hidden. And now that moment had come. The burden she had carried alone was no longer hers alone to bear, and as the truth settled into the foundation of the monarchy, one unavoidable reality emerged. In the end, the Queen Mother's final act may have been her most powerful, not a public speech, not a royal ceremony, but a private decision that ensured her legacy would survive through someone she believed represented the crown's true future. Princess Anne's revelation didn't just expose a secret, it confirmed that the monarchy's future had been carefully shaped long before anyone realized. And Catherine had always been at the center of that plan. What once existed only as quiet trust had now become undeniable reality. Catherine's role within the monarchy was no longer defined solely by marriage or expectation. It had evolved into something far more permanent. Over the years, she had faced trials that would have broken many others' relentless scrutiny, impossible expectations, and the emotional weight of representing an institution older than memory itself. Yet she never allowed herself to fracture. She endured, she adapted, she remained steady, and in doing so she unknowingly fulfilled the vision the Queen Mother had seen, long before the world recognized it. The inheritance was never the cause of her strength, it was the confirmation of it. The Queen Mother had understood something others could not yet see. She had recognized that the monarchy's survival depended not on tradition alone, but on emotional resilience, on someone capable of standing firm when public opinion shifted without warning, someone capable of absorbing pressure without allowing it to reshape their loyalty. Catherine had proven that strength not through declarations, but through consistency, through silence when silence was necessary, through grace when grace was hardest to maintain. And now, with the truth revealed, it became clear that the Queen Mother had not simply hoped for Catherine's future importance. She had prepared for it. For Princess Anne, the revelation brought something she had not allowed herself to feel in decades: relief. The promise she had carried in silence had finally been honored. The responsibility she had accepted beside her grandmother's deathbed had been fulfilled exactly as intended. For years, Anne had protected the truth, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. She had endured the isolation that came with knowing something she could not explain. She had carried the burden without seeking recognition, and now, at last, that burden had lifted. Not because the truth had lost its power, but because it had finally reached the moment it was meant to serve. The impact of the revelation extended far beyond inheritance. It reshaped perception. Catherine was no longer seen simply as someone who had entered the monarchy. She was seen as someone who had been chosen by one of its most formidable guardians. That distinction mattered. It reinforced her authority in ways no title ever could, because titles were granted by tradition, But trust, true trust, was granted by judgment, and the Queen Mother's judgment had never been careless. What made the moment even more profound was how it validated everything Catherine had endured without knowing why. Every sacrifice, every moment of restraint, every quiet decision to place duty above personal comfort. These were not random acts of loyalty. They were the very qualities that had earned the Queen Mother's belief in her. And now, with the truth exposed, Catherine's position within the monarchy was no longer defined by expectation. It was defined by destiny fulfilled. Anne, having witnessed the entire journey from its hidden beginning to its inevitable revelation, understood the emotional magnitude of what had been accomplished. She had protected more than a secret. She had protected continuity. She had ensured that her grandmother's final act of leadership would not be erased by doubt or forgotten by time. And in doing so, she had preserved something far more valuable than wealth. She had preserved certainty. Because the Queen Mother had never been guided by impulse, she had been guided by foresight. She had seen the monarchy's future, not as it was, but as it needed to be. And she had acted with the quiet precision that defined her entire life, ensuring that when the time came, the crown would be protected by someone capable of carrying its emotional and symbolic weight without hesitation. And now, that future was no longer approaching. It had arrived, because in the end, the Queen Mother's final instruction wasn't just about fortune. It was about ensuring the crown would survive through the one person she trusted most. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.